From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
In his State of the State, Governor Lincoln Chafee called this the year of the cities and towns, hoping to open the money spigot for struggling communities, especially in education spending.
My budget devotes nearly $40 million in additional education funding to cities and towns.
But his plan to pay for that increase, a 2% hike in the meals tax, may fall flat on Smith Hill. His budget also proposes paying for some, including $45 million in spending cuts, mostly from Health and Human Services. But even Oscar the Grouch wasn't spared.
This is Big Grouch News, so stay tuned, Grouches. We'll keep you updated on the sticky situation.
This week on Newsmakers, our guests, State Budget Officer Thomas Mullaney and Rhode Island Governor Lincoln Chafee.
Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nisi and political reporter for Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Governor.
Good morning.
I'd like to mention that Budget Officer Tom Mullaney will be joining us on the program, joining the Governor for the second half. Ted.
Governor Providence Mayor Angel Taveras stunned a lot of us yesterday when he said the Capitol is on, quote, the brink of bankruptcy. You could have put Providence in receivership a long time ago, but you didn't. Your aide said that you trusted Mayor Taveras' team. Now Judge Flanders in Central Falls is suggesting you should appoint Mayor Taveras as the receiver. Have you given any thought to that idea?
Well, we're hoping to avoid going that route. And yes, we've been working hard with Mayor Taveras since he came in. And as I've said over and over again, that one of the reasons we're in this plight is that we've decimated the state aid to the distressed communities over the prior years before I took office. $195 million we cut in state aid to cities and towns, and that fell disproportionately on distressed communities: Providence, Pawtucket, Woonsocket, West Warwick, Central Falls. And so I've seen this coming for a while. I just knew these communities couldn't survive. And so working with Mayor Taveras and his team, doing everything possible, and now the bankruptcy word has been raised. And I'm hopeful, maybe naively optimistic, that the retirees are going to make some concessions.
They didn't in Central Falls until they went to court.
Yeah, but now we have that example of Central Falls. I think every retiree knows that it's better to give up your COLA than to have your pension cut in half, as what happened in Central Falls.
Yeah.
And so the mayor's going to have a meeting in March, send out notices to all the retirees, and I believe electronically they're going to convene a meeting, and hopefully they'll realize we have to be part of this resolution, the retirees.
You put the blame.
If that's the
Governor,
COLA.
you put the blame at the feet of cutting state aid. But as the judge pointed out in her ruling, recent ruling against Providence when they tried to switch retirees to Medicare, that former Auditor General warned the city not to hand out these generous benefits, but they did it anyway. Some local communities are now begging the state for help to reduce these COLAs. And the COLAs that they had approved, those are a big part of the reason that they're in this soup, and you are eager to bail them out. Isn't the judge right? Didn't the city fail to make proper, cities and towns in Rhode Island fail to make proper decisions early on to put everyone on better footing?
Yes, I'm very much in favor of reforms before we send any kind of bailout, and that's been part of my legislative package all along, talking about how can we make reforms to help the cities and towns, what they call the tools. And a lot of these sins of the past, as we call them, I mean, there's no doubt they're part of the problem.
They're not all ancient history, Governor. I mean,
compounded COLAs.
The Medicare decision was not, 20 years ago.
That was this week. But we're trying to...
The judge's decision was.
Yes.
But, I mean, Governor, you're putting it all on the feet of state aid. Don't these leaders in cities and towns hold some accountability?
Well, let's talk about the Medicare. The legislature last spring gave enabling legislation for the city to switch their retirees over 65 into Medicare, which the mayor did. Hard-working, energetic, smart Mayor Taveras, trying to make reforms in the city, switched those retirees into Medicare, and put the savings, $7 million in his budget, and the judge ruled against him. So trying to make this progress, and you have these adverse rulings in court, what can you do? Now we'll go on and appeal. The mayor's going to appeal that, but
Governor, what specific steps?
These are what we call sins of the past, and you have to put your best legal case forward and try and win.
Given things as they are, these legal decisions, what specific steps do you support to help Providence avoid going into receivership or bankruptcy?
I think the biggest cost is in the ARC, the annual required contribution. It's $60 million in Providence, somewhere close to $60 million, and going up. And so we have to get control of that ARC. And the best way is the COLAs on the retirees. That's the best way, as we did at the state. And hopefully with this meeting in March, we can get the retirees, as did Central Falls, and they're scattered all over the country, the retirees. There's no organization, they're not represented by a union.
Do you feel vindicated? You were pushing hard
and
all
get some
through
concessions.
the fall to get this suspension of the COLAs for the local pension plans in, and the Senate and Treasurer Raimondo fought you on it and won.
Yes.
Do you feel vindicated that you were right that there wasn't time and that should have been in the law?
It would have been a lot easier to address suspension of COLA legislation all in one pension reform package. There's no doubt about that.
How damaging would it be for Rhode Island?
Rather than in a legislative session where everything is on the
table.
Yeah,
but realistically, would that legislation have passed the General Assembly if it included the local element, do you think?
Oh, yes, I do. Yes.
It had the votes?
Yeah, it was, what was the final votes on pension reform?
57 something in the House, yeah.
Yeah,
30
huge margins.
Governor, how damaging...
I think having the cities get into even more financial difficulty is just making it more obvious that we do need to move forward in this reforms and help to the cities and towns.
How damaging would it be for the state as a whole if Providence were to go into receivership?
Or bankruptcy?
Well, the perception is obviously it's going to be in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, national publications, and that's not good. And your bond ratings go down. That's an added cost to our state. You have to pay more to go out to bonding. There's another cost. So we're going to try and avoid that. Perceptions, what's going on in Rhode Island, bond ratings that go down.
A lot of people share your view of Mayor Taveras as putting a good effort in here. How much responsibility do you pass out to David Cicilline and Buddy Cianci for the problems in Providence?
I don't know exactly where compounded COLAs. I mean, in some of the labor contracts, I believe in the fire department, there's 5 men on a ladder in Providence, whereas every other community has 4 men. There's 4 men on an engine in Providence. Every other community has 3. These contracts that have just been so advantageous to labor. I don't know who gets the blame, but I do know that the cuts in state aid occurred into Mayor Cicilline. It wasn't his fault that all of a sudden on his watch, state aid was getting just decimated. He said over $50 million. How do you absorb that with the certain labor contracts and binding arbitration and the like that comes from the state level? You just can't absorb it. Here's a fact. The cuts to the distressed communities was 17%, those that are designated as distressed. The increase in the tax levy went up 16%. So the state just shifted the burden down to the communities that can least afford it, who then passed it on to the property taxpayer, which oftentimes in Providence is the case. It's divided between residential property tax, commercial property tax. Naturally, you don't want to hit the voters, so you raise your commercial rate, which is just businesses, and no wonder there's empty stores in Providence. The commercial property tax is second highest in the country behind Detroit. And so that's what's occurred, taking the state's problems, pushing it down to the cities and towns, which is decimated business, Woonsocket, West Warwick, all those empty stores.
Governor, I want to talk about the legal issues here. Judge Taft Carter has now sided against the government 3 times in recent months. She ruled against the state in an initial section of the pension suit, which is the older pension law, but will affect the new one. She ruled against Pawtucket's effort to implement co-shares with retirees to help pay for their health insurance, and now she's ruled against Providence on Medicare. You'd said last year you were worried about the legal front. You know, what is your legal team making of these setbacks for governments trying to get out from under these costs?
Boy, good question. And we're anticipating in this budget the savings from pension reform past this past fall, and we considered putting in the budget escrow money in case we don't prevail in court. Putting aside that money, that certainly does not help our court case if you have escrow money. So we're in a rock and a hard place. These are real issues.
You sound very concerned that the cards aren't falling your way.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Governor, if I could shift to your budget, you have a couple of tax increases. The business community is not very happy about this. Would it be more advantageous for Rhode Island's economic recovery to have a budget without tax increases and new tax revenue?
Well, that's what the previous administration kept saying. We did not increase taxes while they're shifting it down to the cities and towns. And it's just not honest. Yes, maybe the state didn't have a tax increase on sales tax. We just pushed it onto the hardest tax to pay of all, the property taxpayer. And that's the one that stifles economic growth the most. I believe firmly that no tax is good, but the sales tax is the least harmful for economic growth. No tax is good, but the sales tax is least harmful, and the previous administration put it on the most harmful. Look at Rhode Island's economy. Why are we so much worse off than Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine? We've just made
How would you answer your own question? Is it, you're saying it's because of the cuts in local aid? Aren't there a lot of other reasons for that too?
I would say part of it is the burden we put on the property taxpayer. I do believe that. We've shifted the burden down to those that can least afford it.
That said, Governor, I mean, our Medicaid on a per capita basis, this is the Center on Budget, which is a liberal group in Washington, acknowledges we pay the most per enrollee as of 2007 to Medicaid. I mean, the idea that there's nothing left to cut once you get, I know a lot of hard choices have already been made, but is there really not enough left in the $7.9 billion state budget that we have to move to more taxes at that level?
Well, again, the previous administration, all the cuts were made in state aid to cities and towns, and at the same time, they were going down 18 or 17%. Human services was going up 11%, I believe, in that same tough economic times. And so the reforms are very, very difficult in these human services area, and that's the one we've tackled in this budget. Medicaid, dental, for instance. That's not an easy cut to make, but we did it. So we're addressing the issue that you brought up.
I'm going to want to bring in your budget officer
those are hard ones.
When we continue to talk about the budget in the second half. We're going to go to a break here real soon. But before we do, I have to ask you, in this time of austerity, of penny pinching, Providence on the verge of bankruptcy, stripping workers of their COLAs, state workers, defend asking for raises for your directors.
We're looking at that. That's not something that we've decided on, but there's a public hearing process, and so that is something. Some of these
Do you think they deserve a raise?
Well, you have to be fair. I want to be fair to people that work hard. Look at the success we've had at DMV, for instance. People worked really hard, put in extraordinary amounts of hours to turn around DMV. Now, I'm not saying the person there has been a long-time state employee, but in other areas, they've worked for years without a raise, directors. And so I want to be fair.
All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get kind of nitty-gritty with the numbers on the budget with Budget Officer Thomas Mullaney, and we'll explain why Oscar the Grouch made his first appearance in Newsmakers history. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, Ted Nesi from WPRI.com, and from Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis. We, of course, have the governor, Lincoln Chafee, and also joining us is his budget officer, Thomas Mullaney. Let's talk about the budget, and I want to talk about your increase, proposed increase, $40 million for education spending. In your State of the State, you proposed, a way to pay that is to increase meals taxes by 2%. Critics say this shows you have a complete and utter disconnect with what it is like to run a business. And I want to bring up a comment that someone wrote on Ted's blog. He wrote, talk to any restaurant owner and they will tell you where real marginal profits reside, which are appetizers, desserts, drinks. These are the items that keep a restaurant from closing its doors. Hike the prices and less of these profitable products are sold. Are you out of touch with the small business owner?
Well, first of all, where's that revenue going? It's going to the cities and towns. And in the first half of the show, we talked about what's happening to cities and towns in the state of Rhode Island. And bankruptcy word being used in Providence, Central Falls already going through bankruptcy, Woonsocket right on the edge of not making payroll, West Warwick right on the edge of not making payroll, East Providence not able to make payroll without legislative action, Pawtucket not able to make payroll without legislative action. So these are no easy choices. And we just have to help the cities and towns. The meal and beverage tax, no tax is good.
Do you see how it could hurt their business?
Of course, but that's, what is it on a pizza on a foot long, $5 foot long? It's cup 20 cents, 10 cents on a $5 foot long. So to help our cities and towns, and these restaurants are paying property taxes. Either the landlord is assessing them a property tax increase, or if they own the building, they're getting hammered on the property tax. So we just can't see our cities and towns go into these kinds of financial receiverships and bankruptcies.
Tom.
And I'll also add one more thing, that the governor's budget is based on November revenue estimates. I know you've been through this many times before. The legislative budget is based on May revenue estimates. Historically, the May numbers are better. We all know that. They were last year to the tune of how much, 70 million?
Yeah, well, between the 2 years, over 100 million, actually.
So you are bringing up what my next question was. And what you're saying is, hey, look, it's a placeholder. This probably isn't going to even happen anyway. Tom, is that what this is?
Well,
this
we're
was a
hoping,
placeholder?
We're hoping that the trend is positive.
Trends are positive, and we have seen strong revenues the first part of the year. We did our estimates in November. Since then, our estimates or the actual collections compared to those estimates are running strong. Our biggest concern is on the income tax side, because we have a new income tax was put in place last year, that we're not sure about the withholding that people have done last year. If they didn't change their withholding, or they may be withholding more, we may have some stronger refunds than we're anticipating right now. So that's our biggest concern.
Caveat, but the trend is good.
But let me go to that before we move on. Sorry. Let's say the May revenue numbers come in, and there's $40 million more than we expected. You have about $40 million coming in on the meals and beverage tax. Will you be upset if the legislature drops the meals and beverage tax but keeps the education money?
The most important thing is to keep the education money. I do believe that. Providence is a perfect example of what we're going through this week. And again, I'll say it again, the property tax is the most harmful for economic growth, and that's what we want.
Governor, your tax proposals last year ran into...
The education money is just so directly related to property taxes.
Your tax proposals last year ran into a real buzzsaw of legislative opposition. Did you have any conversations with Speaker Fox and Senate President Pavel this year in advance of making your budget to gauge their support?
We had lots of communication with them last year. The difference was that we didn't have as much communication with the chamber and with other organizations prior to the budget coming out, which we did this year more, especially on what we just talked about. The May revenue numbers are going to be better. Let's not criticize this budget in some kind of a vacuum. We know what happened last year. All that criticism came out, and ultimately $100 million more came in May. And we all should have been together, the chamber and everybody that was affected by last year's budget, talking about, are we making some good decisions here? We know May numbers are going to be better. Let's do the right thing. Instead of that vitriol that surrounded last year's budget.
I'm going to make you squirm here a little bit. How serious was the governor in meetings up at the State House about putting that sales tax proposal back in, that really controversial one that fell flat, as Ian pointed out? He was on this program. He's just 6 months ago said he'd like to do it. I interviewed him again 3 months ago, said he's really looking at it again. How serious was he in those meetings, and how much of a pushback did his staff have to say, look, it's just not going to pass, Governor, it's not going to happen?
Well, I think we went through a variety of options. We did look at the same list as last year. We started looking at some of the things that were the most controversial items, and what would the impact of not doing those be, how much revenue would not be achieved. So we did discuss it. I mean, the governor can speak to how adamant he was about doing it or not doing it, but I think we came to a conclusion that doing some piece on the revenue side, but also looking at a little stronger, more in-depth cuts, was to try to balance both would be the best options.
Tom, you and I exchanged a lot of emails about numbers.
Plus, we anticipated $120 million deficit to start with.
Right. Well, actually, we were projecting a greater deficit pre-pension reform. Once the pension reform was closed, we were about $120 million. So it was much. It was lower. It was lower than last year. But as I said in our executive summary, actually explains that there really were no easy answers after the years and years of reductions that have been made in the budget. So
well, this budget that proposes, I thought it was interesting, the idea of creating an Office of Management and Budget. Obviously, you can quickly jump on that and say no bureaucracy in the state. But I was talking to someone else in the administration who said there is a lot of room to track how the state spends money and maybe do a better job. And right now it's all on your office, but there isn't a staff on management side. It's mostly just the number side. What's the idea behind that? Is that the usual waste, fraud, and abuse, and there's not actually any money there?
It's a combination of things. I mean, we started after the last budget. The governor instructed my office and his policy office to really look at the performance of government. We started a performance management process where we met with all the agencies, went through their missions, looking at what they were required to do, mandates that they have, and looking at what are the priorities that they have. So a lot of the cuts that came in this budget came out of that process, and just determining what are the lowest priorities for an agency. So part of this is an offshoot of that to try to, we're doing it on a part-time basis. My staff, the governor's policy staff, other people, to really have a focused group of people who can look at that on an ongoing basis and really help. What are the outcomes? What are government agencies doing? What should they be doing, and how well are they doing it? And should we invest in an area such as the DMV that wasn't doing well, but clearly is a function of government that needs to be carried out? So by investing in that area, we made it better.
Governor, let me ask you, just I want to get into something we touched on in the open. Why do you hate Big Bird?
Channel 36. Right.
You have called for stripping Rhode Island PBS of its funding. Why?
It was another line item. In the budget process, you start with a deficit of 120 million roughly, and you have your expenses. I wanted to invest in the cities and towns. I asked them, the mayors and town managers, how best to help them. They said accelerate the school funding formula.
So that came out of discussions with the mayors?
Yes, it was bottoms up. And then you start with that, and you, Channel 36 is 800,000.
It's about $1 million on an annual basis, so we've
not a lot of money, but that's what adds up.
Well, it's a lot of money to them, though.
Yeah, I know.
Would you be okay if they disappeared and we had GBH in Boston and we had the Connecticut station?
We're working with them at their options and what other states have done with their public TV stations.
Ted, it felt like they were blindsided.
They did. They said to me, Governor, they said they didn't know it was coming. I talked to the president and CEO of Rhode Island PBS. He was as shocked as anybody when he read it. I think you read it on my blog, actually, for the first time. I mean, you know, did you do enough outreach as you prepared this?
There are hundreds and hundreds of line items, and the process is it's going to go into the legislature. We are going to have May revenue numbers, which are going to be different. But for it to be a shock in this economic climate, any area of state government, it shouldn't be a shock.
I mean, that particular topic was discussed in our meetings with Channel 36 on their budget. So
there were meetings?
There were meetings. We have meetings with every agency. We did discuss that. I mean, Dave was not aware that it actually ended up in the budget. That's, you know,
Dave is the president and CEO.
Dave Picciarelli, that the outreach that we need to do sort of right before the budget goes in. There's a lot of things going on, getting ready for the press briefings, getting our documents done, getting ready for the legislative briefings. So that did not occur at that time. You know, we apologize, but he was aware that the discussions were going on for that type of, you know, to move them off to be more self-supporting. It's not so much that we're looking to eliminate them. We're state funds is about 1/3 of their budget, so we're looking to work with them and trying to develop other options for them to fund that piece of the budget.
Governor, you used your State of the State address this week to fault some Rhode Islanders for being too negative, but isn't some negativity justified given the state's persistently high unemployment and its decades-long struggles with economic development?
All the more reason when Rhode Island has an outlier of an unemployment number, and we are an outlier, much higher than our neighboring states, that we should work together to address these challenges and not get caught up in, as I said in the State of the State, some of the foolishness. And certainly the holiday tree, I sent out the exact same invitation my predecessor sent out, word for word, except for a different name. I mentioned the State of the State, the distance of the train station. I've said it's the closest Amtrak to an airport in the country. Okay, maybe Burbank, California has a couple feet closer. All right,
let me ask you this,
closest Amtrak to an airport east of the Rocky Mountains. I stand corrected. But this is a great economic asset. Let's get together. Let's work in the state to get our people back to work.
Do you bear any blame for kind of watering down your message or your approach by sometimes tilting at windmills rather than focusing on a core message?
I do believe that some of the social issues are important to our economy. That's my belief. And everything's devoted towards improving our economy. I do believe gay marriage, people want to have a tolerant atmosphere. Young people, that's what they like, and that's where you see successful economies. In Cambridge or in Silicon Valley, some kind of tolerance towards education of immigrants. I think that helps our economy. So it's all related, in my view, to growing our economy.
Governor, I want to ask
new generation coming along, what do they want?
I want to ask you, running short of time, I know, a political question. You always tell me you don't think about re-election because you're too busy, and you're quirky enough that I sometimes believe it. But people at the State House often say, you are a politician they could imagine deciding, did my best for a term, you know, there's other things in life, I'm going to step aside and let someone else have a shot. Is there any scenario where you might not be on the ballot in 2014, you'll serve out this term and then say, good luck?
I really am not thinking
You're
about
going to do it again.
I'm just starting my second year in office. That's a long way away.
So will you campaign with Treasurer
raising
Armando
money.
when she runs to
I'm raising money, and that's really the test of if you're serious about.
So we'll watch your fundraising.
Yes.
Yeah.
Will you sign the
and no one likes that. So.
Will you sign the redistricting bill despite Republican complaints that it includes a pretty egregious gerrymander?
I know there's been a back and forth on the redistricting. We'll have to address that when it comes.
Well, it's passed, so you're going to sign it?
It hasn't come to my desk yet. I'll have to have some discussion.
Oh, come on,
I assume I will. I assume I will.
Okay.
I want to ask you another political question.
A total commitment.
Your dad had worked with Mitt Romney's father. I'm wondering if you're going to endorse Mitt Romney if he's the nominee.
I endorsed President Obama last year, and I'm watching this year that anytime the candidates get into these Republican primaries, you just hear, for me, outrageous stances on issues that I care about.
What's one you care about you've heard come up in the Republicans, the reason, kind of thing you left the party because of?
Well, on the social issues, really, that's what you see in Republican primaries, a lot of the talk on social issues, and I don't know exactly where Governor Romney came on birth control, but no birth control, in Republican primaries, those seem to get elevated. I care about getting our people back to work, and that's what I'm
20 seconds here. You're a numbers guy. I know what he's going to say. He picked the Patriots to win the Super Bowl. Yeah. You're a numbers guy. What do you think?
I think they have a very good shot of winning. I'm not going to try to predict a score, but basketball is more my game as my father was a coach. So
how are you feeling about the Celtics?
All right,
I think PC is doing great. So.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the program, and I appreciate you watching. If you missed any of it, it's on our website, WPRI.com. For Ted Nesi and Ian Donis, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers. Thank you, gentlemen.